You're listening and watching to Inside iOS Dev, show about real-world iOS development. And today with you, your host, Alex Bush. And I have a very special guest, Daniel Hall. How's it going, Daniel?
Good. Not very special.
Well, so Daniel and I, we work at Wayfair, we're co-workers. And lately, at our company, we've been having maybe not an entire engineering team, but architects on their engineering team been having a lot of discussions and conversations about dependency injection and how to implement that holistically throughout our application. And we have a big engineering team, big app. It's 60, 70, 80 people, something like that.
I think we're like 80 plus for iOS.
That's a lot of people, and we have a certain architecture to support such a large team. We use Viper specifically. It's a clean architecture implementation, but it's been not as consistent as I would like to for it to be, and sort of that's why that conversation partially why it started, and we're still figuring out the best approach. But Daniel and I, we had two sort of proposals that we shared on how to implement it and how we see it should be done. But they are different though. They're similar maybe conceptually, but how we implement them is different. So we decided it was an interesting, very, very interesting conversation for us, just between us to kind of go through. But we figured we should probably share that sort of thought process and the ultimate proposed solutions with everyone else. So that's why we're recording this. We're not going to do many takes or anything. We're just going to do raw kind of share screen and show what we thought of, right?
It's live coding, but pre-recorded.
Kind of, yeah. We'll probably cut like a little, maybe some long pause or something like that. But other than that, not really.
Okay.
So essentially, let's start with the solution I was advocating for, and then we'll go for Daniel's. Let's see. So the idea, the idea for the solution I'm proposing is coming from Uber Ribs architecture, where it's also an implementation of clean architecture where your entire code base is split into ribs, router, interactor, builder, little units of business logic. And each one of them has a component object that resolves dependencies, and component objects depend on each other in a tree structure as well. And that's where the idea is coming from. I'm advocating for having those component objects and having it be structured that way. Now I'll show you guys what it means by sort of rebuilding it from scratch effectively. But before we get into even the sort of the implementation details, let's see. Oh well, I'm in Scene Delegate, all new. Wait, where did I start again?
You can still go into App Delegate, I guess.
I guess, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. Basically, I need a starting point, since I'm not using Playground. So the kind of to state the problem, right? What are we trying to solve? Typically, in our application, what we have is a bunch of Viper stacks, right? And we need to inject dependencies into each one of them. Interactor has its own dependencies, presenter has their own dependencies, views have their own dependencies, and so on. But I think for like simplicity's sake, because I don't want to be getting too much into like Vipers specifically, because it's not about that, I think we could just say that like we have a feature page one view controller, for example, right? And that is a view controller subclass. Sort of, so some UI thing that needs a bunch of things for it to work. And well, maybe, okay, just to sort of illustrate though, I think what I want to do is to have a presenter for it, so that we have kind of two places, two different objects that do different work, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say, oh yeah, of course, because it's a view controller. So let's say it injects a presenter that it will send messages to, although probably what typically presenter holds the view, right?
No, actually, I think in our Viper stack it goes back up that way. The view owns the presenter owns the interactor. Okay. Yeah, so I think you're good.
Gotcha. Okay, so either way, that's basically gonna be something we inject, right?
Yeah.
And we save it, and now we need this type, right? That we rely on. Mm-hmm. It's just some protocol, nothing in it for now, and maybe have an implementation presenter, presenting. Okay, same thing. Nothing there yet. And let's say, so, okay. Super init, what was it? Nib, right? So let's say we have two things that we want to inject in that view controller and presenters respectively. Let's assume that view controller specifically wants to have analytics object. Mm-hmm. And that's gonna be, what's the good name?
Yeah, tracking.
Tracking. Okay. Yeah, let's just call it that. Tracking. Tracking. Yeah, I guess that's the name of the protocol, right? Mm. So that would be a protocol tracking, maybe with a method track. And we want to have a tracker that implements it. And here we just track. Right, and same thing. Let's say, since it's a proper dependency injected, we want to have a property for it, and we save it. And let's say presenter also wants something injected, and maybe in this case a web service, right? Because in this scenario that we have, maybe it's going to execute some networking requests for some reasons. So let's say it's web servicing, and that also is a property, and we save it. I think this is the point where a lot of developers complain, oh, like, why do I need to write boilerplate? Can't Swift just do it for me? Anyway, so, and then, yeah, we have our mock protocol for that. And let's say that this one has fetch data method. And again, concrete implementation called web service, and it fetches data. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Right, so in this case, what would happen when we eventually, at some point in our application, right? Like, don't worry about the rest of this, that's irrelevant. Somewhere at some point in our app, we would want to initialize that view controller. and therefore we need the dependencies that it relies on. So somewhere we do that, and which means we need a presenter for it, right? So let's create that feature one, page one presenter. And that thing now as well needs dependencies. So again, just for the sake of brevity, somewhere here, somewhere in the app's lifecycle, they will be created, right? Those dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just initialize them here, and our tracker. Right, and presenter goes here, and tracker goes here. Okay, so this works. So shuts up. Oops. Can I do this? Is it gonna still complain? No. Okay, good. So basically, that's kind of a normal scenario, right? We would have a view controller for one page or one screen, view controller for another screen, and they'll have some setup like this, where they get some dependencies injected, and those dependencies are resolved somehow, somewhere in the app. What unfortunately kind of happened with our code base, a lot of dependencies became singletons, right? They were not created in the right places or duplicated or things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the core concerns of dependency injection is, when you're deep into the app and you've got some view that someone taps on it and it spins up a new view, how do you get the things that new view needs to it?
Right.
And ultimately, it comes down to a couple choices, but the one that a lot of people choose for simplicity and ease is they just create a global singleton, and they just let that view grab whatever it needs from the singleton.
Actually, let's showcase that so that we kind of drive the point better. So let's say we have another view controller, right, that also has some dependencies. So let's say it's page 2 view controller, and let's say this one, let's say it injects tracking as well, but also A/B testing service.
That's a good one.
A/B testable, right? So that's usually the name. Final class A/B tester. Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Test stuff. Because, sure. And right, so then, okay, so we have our new thing. It also has tracking, but then it has this A/B testable. All right, so screen share, yes. So yeah, new view controller, two things injected in it, and we needed this, I guess. Oops.
Right, a presenter too, right?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking maybe not created, but yeah, kind of for the example's sake.
Yeah, sure. No worries.
But yeah, it probably should have some presenter or whatnot injected. So, okay. So now what happens when, let's say, view controller, feature one page one view controller routes to feature one page two view controller, right? Then it needs to create it or ask something else to create it either way, right? So let's say, again, for simplicity's sake, so let's say it's view did load, and maybe there's a method, something like navigate to page two, right? And then this, oops, this thing is where kind of from that view controller you route to that one, right? Which means you need to initialize. Mm-hmm. So same thing, we kind of use the initializer. And in this case, okay, we do have tracking. So I guess we can pass that. Luckily, like we're lucky that we have it. Mm-hmm. But for A/B tester, right? We don't have that instance. We didn't inject it or what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tracking. Oh, that's tracker. Oh. Right, because I just copy pasted. Right. But we don't have A/B tester instance. So we have one option is to create it right here, right, in line. That would be a bad idea for a large application, especially. What is it? A/B testable? No, tester.
Plus, we got to assume that A/B testing information is coming from, a back end somewhere. It's very unlikely that, feature one, page one view controller knows how to talk to a general A/B testing backend and get information from it.
Exactly. So that's basically, that's kind of a no-go, right? This needs to come from somewhere, likely actually like application did finish launching with option or some place like that where everything starts up, right? And everything gets wired even before you display your UI effectively. You want to fetch, typically for A/B testing specifically, you want to fetch all the experiments, all the variables, all that stuff, right? And only then it can be used in other places. So a common technique for that would be, well, people doing just the singleton, right?
Yep.
But then that gets us in all sorts of messy situations, and singletons cannot be injected, therefore they cannot be unit tested. So let's say routing to page 2 or page 3 that we hypothetically could have had, that decision where to go depends on some A/B testing variable, right? So if in a unit test we want to see, like with these variables, we want to see routing to page 3 or page 2, we can't really mock that with a singleton.
Right.
So that's a no-go. Basically what I'm trying to say, it's such a naive approach that it's not going to fly.
Yeah.
Again, and especially on a large scale, like we have so many devs, right, doing it. Also, singletons are global state. What if some of the variables get overridden or something like that somewhere else that you rely on? That's not going to work either.
Yep.
So essentially, what could you do in this case then, right? Well, you could then inject it. That's kind of one of the solutions, which means you'll probably have to move that property, just like here, up to whoever's calling it, and then inject it there, which means you're pushing this out what is it, like this, tester, pushing it up to the initializer of that page one view controller, right? Which means we need to do it in here. Oops. So that's already better than nothing, right? But then, and then it's not compiling. What is going on? My names are wrong. No. No.
Let's see.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. It's just the property name is different.
Oh, right.
Okay. So that's already better, right? But then if you're using your that view controller all over your application, you need to then inject it everywhere like that. And again, typically what I've seen people end up doing is just having this default value and like a shared, like A/B tester shared instance or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Which kind of, well, still a singleton issue, right? But then the argument, I guess, is that, oh, you still can inject it. Also breaks down with tests in my experience, and it's not a very well-defined and robust solution. And again, what if it wasn't not an A/B test object, but something else, something more in line that you could create in line, but you sometimes need, sometimes don't, maybe some kind of a formatter, right? Mm-hmm. Then it doesn't make sense to create all the little formatters up here when the application launches for all the view controllers you have. It's just too much. You're gonna have this loaded setup launch code right in your app, where maybe it only makes sense to create that formatter in the feature page 2 view controller, and maybe 2 children view controllers that it has, it just passes it to them, right? So you sort of, some of the dependencies are not, when we say dependency injection, doesn't necessarily mean global scope, right? Global dependencies for the entire application. Sometimes they are, and quite often they are, but they are also often local or even so-called inline just for that instance only, right?
Right.
So for that, here's where, and again, and like this is a very simplified example. With a Viper stack, you, for each view controller that you initialize, you actually also have interactor, presenter, well, I guess, well, yeah, and the router, right? That's kind of the whole stack. And each one of those have their own respective dependencies for business logic, for presentation logic, for whatever routing necessary, and other things, right? So this quickly grows, just becomes unmanageable. And this is the solution I'm proposing, which is taken from Uber Ribs architecture, is to have for each kind of a unit of logic, of work that we have in our application. And again, if it was a Viper app, it would be a one group of view interactor, presenter, build, router. But in our case, it's probably makes sense to just attach it to an individual view controller or a group of view controller presenter. And what it will be is basically, it's going to be basically this object that gets created every time you initialize each view controller. And the object is called component. See, component. Feature 1, page 2 component. And then each, okay, let me build an implementation of this. So you would want to make it private so that, well, actually, we're kind of doing it all in one file, so it's not, doesn't illustrate it well. Technically, I mean, this view controller should be in one file, then another. Actually, you know what, let me do that, because then it kind of makes it easier to understand.
Sure.
So this is new file, view controller. Yes. Oh, okay, I don't need to do this. I can just copy. Yeah. And then we will have page 2, view controller. And this goes there. And let's have another file for all the dependencies just to get them out of the way. And we'll move all the things out of here. Wait, anything else we want to move? Oh yeah, I guess we want to move this guy too, right?
Sure, to move it with the view controller.
And those.
Or into its own file.
Yeah, I'll just put it with the view controller for now.
Sure.
I think it doesn't make sense. Okay, and this guys, right? This also goes to dependencies. So, you know, again, this is irrelevant, just details for us to have this whole thing compile, really.
Yeah.
So, and tester doesn't like it. Okay, now it works. All right, so the idea is the following. So for each one of your units, right, you would declare a component object, component type, which is an object that yeah, I guess I'm going to simplify it a little bit without generics and such, how it was in the implementation. Actually, is in the original implementation.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's still going to be the same, just a bit more, less forced, a bit
Sure.
more conventional. But we'll see where we'll get with it. But the idea is this. So when you, and again, okay, so for the sake of example, let's say somewhere here in view did load, we do use A/B tester, and we say test, and we use track, well, it's called tracker to track, right? What would happen? Okay, let's see. So you would create, instead of, well, you still will have this properties, and with just a single view controller, it doesn't illustrate the point as well, unfortunately. Well, now I'm thinking maybe we should create the whole Viper stack. So what I'm missing here, basically what I was gonna do,
share that component across.
I need a router, right? Again, I don't want to be getting into Viper though, how it works.
I mean, you could always just create like some sort of build feature one, page two view controller, like a global function that takes a component and creates the view controller.
Let's do this. Well, but then I'll get into the whole builders thing. I was gonna say, let's create a builder for it.
But not call it a router.
I know, you're right. All right. Okay. Let's see where. It's not gonna get it. All right. Let's do a router. Unfortunately, just this one thing. So basically, we're gonna have router per each. Well, view controller in our case, or collection of like view controller and presenter. And let's call it feature one, page two, router. And this thing, what it does, it effectively does to, like, okay, so for now, kind of before we go in with the components approach, what it will do two things, right? Like after you initialize it, you actually say create view controller, right? It's sort of a build method that will return this particular, oops, I guess this one, right? This particular view controller.
Well, I mean, something's going to build the page one too, so.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll get to it. I just want to start from the bottom. Okay. I think it's going to be less things to untangle.
Okay.
And that's where we would do this. Whatever we've done over here, right? Kind of this navigate to.
Right.
But this initialization part, instead of having it here, we would move it over here. And then return. And here, that means we're actually, what we're doing, we're using that router. And we're creating the view controller, right? Does that make sense? Does that mimic it?
It does, but I mean, ultimately, I think it may be the very next step you're going to do, but ultimately, we're going to need some sort of like weak reference to this router to start with, like, because ultimately you're going to have to create that router with the component, right?
Well, okay, yes. I don't want to get into that again. It's kind of getting deeper and deeper, more towards Viper things, specific Viper things.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I guess what I want to illustrate is that there's this overarching thing, such as called a router, and you use it to initialize that view controller you want, and then navigate to it. In our case, the navigate to it part, that's what we're omitting. It should be here, but we're just printing things.
Right.
But the main point is that we're using that object to do that, right?
Okay.
And that means that this object needs to inject these dependencies or resolve these dependencies, just like before this one was doing it, right?
Right.
So in this case, what we want, well, okay, yeah. Oops, let's do this. Want to inject them and kind of, well, do the same thing. Okay. Oh yeah, and here we're injecting them. Tracker. Right. So basically, throughout our code base, we're going to have a bunch of these things, right? Bunch of routers that create those view controllers, but also then, again, the dependency kind of resolution injection, they have to take care of it. Because now it's kind of moved out of here, right? Into, well, yeah, into the router. So the idea here is such that instead of this, what you'll have is this private component object component, and this is feature. Do I have it already? No. Feature one. Yeah, go ahead.
I think you made it private in one of those files, which may be why you can't see it.
Yeah, I need to move it. Yep. I think it's in here, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So that actually goes away. So yeah, so it's a private type that only lives here in the same file as the router. And the idea is that you can't really reuse it anywhere else. You cannot actually take it and inject it into the view controller or presenter or whatever else you're building. And we'll get to that later, why that's important. And what we're doing, we're creating that component first thing as we initialize the router. And then later, instead of having these private variables here, right, when we initialize our view controller, we're actually going to ask our component to resolve these dependencies that we need for that view controller, right? Which means we'll have to declare respective variables, right? These two guys.
Mm-hmm.
In here, which means we have to either, same sort of logic, right? We have to either just return them by initializing, like a tracker, right? And A/B tester. And that would work. In this case, we don't need this. And now we actually don't even need to inject anything, at least for now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this object will be the one kind of figuring out or creating, in this specific case for now, the dependencies that view controller needs. But it's still kind of on the same level there, somewhere deep down in our hierarchy of our application, how do we, same problem occurs, right? Like we can't really create a tracker and A/B tester here. It really needs to come from the very beginning launch of the application. Mm-hmm. So for that, in those instances where you cannot do that, cannot resolve those dependencies, initialize them here, what you will do, you will actually rely on a dependency object that this component will have. If I can spell, dependency, and you ask for things, right? Like in this case for a tracker, and then dependency, or A/B tester. And where that dependency object comes from, that is something that needs to be injected in this component object. And there is always, for each component, there is a respective dependency protocol. So in this case, it's going to be called feature2 dependency. And we inject that. Private, but yeah. And that dependency protocol, that's where we would declare those types that we need, right? So we kind of, what happens here, we're delegating the fetching or initializing or figuring it out of dependencies from this level of this component, of this router, of this view controller, ultimately, up to whoever's using it. Because then, since, see, the compiler complains, right? We actually really need to pass that some type that conforms to that dependency
right.
protocol. And that is gonna be the dependency passed to this router when it's initialized. And right now, we're using it, what is it? Oh, yeah, it's this. Right now, we're using it in one place, right? In this view controller. Which means we need to pass dependency, right? And that could be actually us, right? This particular view controller that's using the page 2 view controller or page 2 router to get page 2 view controller. Which means one of the options we have is to, now I'm lost. Nope. Where is it? Here. Which means we need to adopt that protocol, right? We could. That's one of the options. We could adopt that protocol in that view controller, and let's say that which means that we need to implement tracker and A/B tester properties. They are already implemented here, right? Since we were injecting them before, I think we just need to make them vars to satisfy.
Have to make them public if they're in a protocol.
Right? Yeah, I guess. Does internal
or
work?
internal? Yeah. They must be as visible as the type itself.
Right. But then we kind of, what happened here, right? We, in a way, that's what it was before, right? But we kind of we shifted responsibility for figuring out what's needed from here, right? From the place where we create the view controller up to some other object. And then we don't really kind of think much. And we, effectively, in this example, we just delegate. But we'll go through adding, after we're done with this, we'll go through adding more dependencies. It's going to be more clear how this is beneficial. And then the kind of another thing to do here is we actually need to create another router to kind of finish with this for the page one view controller, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So in this case, this page one, and it's pretty similar, I think. Okay, well, all right. Final class page one router. And we'll have create view controller method, which is this guy. And that's what happens here, right? And in this case, we want more things. We will also create in a presenter along with it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a little bit more of a realistic example. And same thing, right? We don't have those objects or properties yet. What we'll have a component object for this router that resolves them somehow. We don't really care how. And we would create it. And we would copy. And yeah, so it's same thing. It's a private component just for this file that we only use here. And that's the thing resolving all of this. I think this would be faster. Wait, I need this, right? I need web service. What else do I need?
You needed web service tracking, was it?
All right, let's just follow the compiler. I guess that's like the easiest thing. Tracker, yeah. Tracker, these two guys.
Yeah.
Giant compiler mess. Right. So we have a variable for it, private, let's component, and right, and then again, right, we're either creating. So let's take a look how it was before in the page one view controller. I guess we're injecting everything again. Injecting tracker, and maybe where's the web service coming from?
Maybe that was something.
Oh, that's for the presenter.
That's what it was. That's right. That's right.
That's right. Okay.
We weren't going to make the calls from the view controller, which is good.
So let's look at how we resolve that right now. And that's coming from the app, from the application launch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the same thing. So for illustration purposes, what we could have done, we could have created them right here, right? The same way.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would have it working.
On line 17, you want to add a T to return. There you go.
Return. Something doesn't work. A/B test, A/B tester. Right. So, and that will work, right? But again, just like with the previous router and the view controller, we don't know on what level that this is used, so we can't really be initializing all of those here, right?
Yeah, and I think generally, again, coming back to like why dependency injection sometimes matters is that usually you want the same instance of this, which is why singletons are so often used. But like, again, if something in the app went and got all the A/B testing settings, you know, you're going to probably use that same instance everywhere. And
Right.
so you have to create it at a high enough level that it can go everywhere rather than be created pretty low in the stack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually a good point. You would want to have one instance likely across your application. It does not have to be a singleton.
Right.
Although I guess singleton ensures it technically.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But it has the other problems, as you said. But that's one of the interesting clarifications. I think that's really important. And it's probably a totally different subject to talk about what the problems with singletons are. But
oh, I have an entire episode about it.
Oh, you do? Oh, perfect.
Yes.
But single instance, whatever you may not like about singletons and the problem with those, that doesn't apply just to the idea of having a single instance. A single instance is fine. Mm-hmm. It's really how you get to that instance that matters. Exactly.
Yeah. And again, in some cases, though, and we'll illustrate it. Maybe we want to have multiple instances. It's okay. Formatters, like have a gazillion of them across the app if they're not too much performance, degrading performance. Or your own form, I don't know, calculators of sorts, right?
Yeah.
So, but in this case, kind of same logic. We don't really want to be getting it over here, so we want to get it from dependency. So dependency web service, right? Which means we want to have dependency object in here, which means we need to inject it when we initialize, which means we want to declare that protocol, right? That someone will be fulfilling, whoever's using this router, mm-hmm. This view controller needs to provide the web servicing, right? And then provide the tracking and A/B testing, testable. And dependency dot tracker dependency dot A/B tester. Which again, right back to this, means we need to inject that, and we are. Which means ultimately now we got to the higher level. I guess, yeah, okay. So we're not using that router yet. What technically should be happening instead of initializing it like that, which still works, right? Because we individually picking dependency objects and putting them inside of those presenter and view controller. Mm-hmm. What we really should be using actually that router, because that's the kind of a main entry point and a factory, effectively, for feature one, page one view controller, right? So we want to use feature one, page one router. We want to initialize it. I want to say create view controller. And I guess it's gonna complain that I don't have this. And maybe, okay, so let's do this. We'll inject an app component in here. Well, okay, fine. So that's another object that we don't have. Component, yeah. That's another object we don't have yet. But that would be the app-wide, kind of going with the same logic and extending it up to the very root of where everything begins, which is did finish launching with options, right? We would have another one, which I guess, well, yeah, probably also should be private as well. App component type, and we'll create that object that implements, that feature one, page one dependency protocol, and will be fulfilling the ultimate kind of application-wide dependency resolution, which means all of these guys, we actually would want to move here, and we want to also vars, right? Can I do this? I think I can do this, right?
Yeah.
That's simpler.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you can still make them lets if you're gonna instantiate them right there too.
Oh, I see. I think I need this.
You need to explicitly type them.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough, Swift.
I guess otherwise the inferred type is just tracker, not the actual protocol type.
Really?
I think it's just...
Oh, it's the name. Never mind. All right, so yeah. So, and now we kind of have this whole structure going on, right? Yeah. So with this setup, there are several advantages to it. One is that you're either deciding, well, okay, let me illustrate it first, actually, before I kind of finally summarize it all. So let's say one scenario. Let's say you need a dependency in your page 2 view controller. All of a sudden, you need the dependency that's only specific to this view controller and only going to be used here because it's very special for some reason, right? So let's say, again, in the theme of formatters, let's say it's, well, okay. Again, it could have been in another file. Let's say it's a page 2 awesome formatter, right? And that thing formats. I don't know. Let's say
it has to do it awesomely.
Hold on. Print, and it does it awesomely.
There it is. Now it meets requirements.
I know. It's a unit test pass. Actually, can you unit test against the command line? I don't know. Input, output, maybe validate that somehow.
Yeah, probably. That'd be interesting.
By the way, this is a freaking singleton, like global nasty singleton, technically.
Print?
Yeah. It's a global function, even worse. But anyway, convenient though, I can't deny.
Yeah, you don't want to have to pass the print function down through every class that's going to use it.
Right. So, okay. And let's say, again, right, let's say this is the only view controller where it's used. So you would say, okay, I want this formatter, like my awesome formatter. Does that make sense? So yeah, and we want to inject it, right? So we're good developers. We're doing everything for unit testability. We're injecting it, and we're using that thing here to format. But if you look at the compiler now, the only place where we create this view controller, where it needs to be injected, this new formatter, is over here, right?
Yep, the router.
What's the name? My awesome formatter. Yeah, so it's in the router, exactly. Here's the question, right? Does it make sense then? Do we have to go all the way back up to the root of the application, right? Go to the app did finish launching and do it over here, or specifically in its app component, right? If we're grouping initialization of dependencies there, right, and kind of pass it all the way through the chain, it could be super deep, right? So it's so much boilerplate. Mm-hmm. Not really. At least not in this specific case, because in this specific case, again, it's only used for this specific view controller. You actually technically have one of the two options. Right there, right before you create the view controller, you could actually do it there. Mm-hmm. And you could say, what was it? Formatter. This one, yes.
Page 2 awesome formatter. There it is. So I mean, that's clearly specific to page 2. So right there in the name. So maybe it doesn't belong at the app level. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one thing. And yeah, and you could create it there. It's actually kind of fine if that's like the only place where you create it. But to be adhering to this convention, this approach, you actually would want to also resolve it through component object. So you would want the component object to give it to you. And that means you, again, create a new variable with that type, right? But now, instead of doing this return dependency and then getting it from the from the dependency, mm-hmm. you actually create it right here. And you're done. So that's sort of one, again, advantage where you kind of the level on which you decide yourself where to resolve it. Do I resolve it right here, right now? Or do I kick it up to the parent user of this? And same goes, one more example, we'll kind of wrap up with my solution. And same goes for, let's say, again, right, we have all of these guys as shared dependencies across there, like passed down across the entire app. But what if there's only a group of view controllers that are using another formatter, or let's say it's a calculator, just to distinguish it. Maybe only page 1 and page 2 in your app use that calculator. Every other page doesn't. Every other view controller, they don't care. And let's say it's in the presenter, right, of this view controller. That's where the calculation needs to happen, so that presenter tells the view controller, here's the final string to display, or something like that, right? Which means we would want to have it here. Let's say it's to make it simpler, again, it's just a class, no protocol. My calculator. It's not awesome this time, I'm sorry. And it's because it's just boring and it's calculate only, right? So we, again, same thing, we want to inject it. But Yeah, and I'm kind of following the compiler, right? This is where we need it. In the router, where we create this group, this view controller and its presenter. Well, yeah, I guess sort of. We're not passing it down to, okay, well, let's do that. So you would again, you would go to your component, respective component of your, for that view controller and router, and you would create a calculator property. And now again, you have a decision. Do I want to get it up from the parent, or do I want to just initialize it here, right? In this case, the parent doesn't care. It's too specific. This calculator is going to be just used here in this page 1 and maybe page 2 too, right? So we only do that here. And then we say component, calculator, and we're done. And now one more thing, and let's say this same calculator, for some reason, we actually also need it in the page 2 as well, right? And again, same thing, we'll initialize it. And then we need to pass it down. So is that what I do? Calculator, right. Right. Sorry, I'm jumping back and forth, but same thing, right? Like in page 2, we need the same calculator. We also would ask our component for it. But in this case, instead of creating it, again, we ask the parent for it, which means we use dependency and ask for calculator, which means we declare it in the protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Calculator, my calculator. And now we don't have to do anything else after that, because we already set it up in the.
Well, the other one is creating it locally further down the stack.
Is it?
Yeah, it creates it right in the page 2 component. So it's not, it hasn't actually made it into the app components or the.
Oh shoot! This is what I forgot to do. Actually, this dependency implementation now needs to go. Oh yeah, this needs to go into the component.
Right. And then that means we need to add the calculator to the component, which is an app delegate, right?
Right.
Oh, interesting. I see.
Yeah, it goes in
you're
here,
putting
right?
it in this component.
Because we're not, this is not the thing anymore, resolving it.
Got it.
And we actually don't need any of this over here.
Mm-hmm.
Oops. We need the presenter, but nothing else. We don't need this. And we don't need this. And the dependency. Right. You see, this is, it's a bit of a mess because we don't have the full Wayfair setup and we're kind of trying to walk around it. So, wait.
Because the component doesn't actually get passed all the way into the view controller. So,
right, and this is not where we want to navigate actually. So instead of doing it here, we actually we want to do it in the router. man, how do we do this? Because again, now we'll have to inject the router. Again, we're like getting deeper into the Viperization of it. But okay, I mean, I won't do it. That's going to be just too much down the rabbit hole. But effectively, what it should be though, instead, the router should have a function to route to page 2, right? And then that's where we create that using the router for that page.
And we can use our own component.
Yes, and we can use our own component object. Let's say routing to this. Oh yeah, so dependency is component, and what is happening? Oh, because we don't need it, right? Not anymore. None of those.
Oh, right. It doesn't have those extra arguments now, right?
Right. Right, so now it's making more sense. Let's see what else. Oh, and now it even compiles.
Extra bonus.
Extra bonus. Let's see. Right, we're not navigating. Oh, yeah. And we didn't have that problem in the view controller 2 because it doesn't navigate anywhere.
Right.
So it doesn't use any routers.
Right.
Okay, so yeah. Right, so now the whole chain works. As I was saying, let's say we want a calculator that's only used in a subset of view controllers, not everywhere. And those view controllers, one is the parent and the rest of them are children under, maybe several layers deep, but still. So in this case, you would, as normally, you would declare in your view controllers that, yeah, I want to inject it, that type, that object, but then when you resolve it in your router, in your factory, your builder, whatever that is, you would ask your component to do it, and the component either, in this case, will ask the parent, and then the parent component creates it, or it will, like this component, initialize it for itself and the children, and it is using it as well. And the whole thing kind of works with each other with these component objects, and then each component object implements dependency protocol for its children, its direct children.
Right.
It's not the grandchildren or down the level, but only its direct children. And that's kind of how this whole solution works, right? And yes, there is a drawback to it, as you guys saw, kind of jumping back and forth, chasing the compiler, or well, in a way, chasing the compiler is actually good in my opinion, because then you don't make a mistake. But you have to kind of adhere to that. You have to stick with that convention of having a protocol for each and having a component object for each. And you have to use the component object to get the dependencies you want to inject. In the final implementation, how Uber has it implemented in their framework, it's all enforced through generics, and types are enforced effectively. So you have even less of a convention, but more of a, well, compile time errors. And it works pretty nice. And we work for Uber at their scale. They also got 80 people or 100 at this point.
Yeah, they're huge.
But yeah, and we'll put this example somewhere on GitHub probably. But yeah, Daniel, let's go for your approach, because you have something similar. This one is essentially, it's a kind of like a delegate wrapper type, or no, what was it? Decorator, right? Design pattern. You also have a decorator implementation.
Yeah,
different.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. First, I think it's a very similar. Like again, the concepts are the same. So, we don't have to explain some of the rationale because a lot of the rationale is the same. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. I wonder if I can make my font bigger. I can.
Yep, way better.
So I guess part one is not the decorator aspect. It's more of the, it's composing protocols, and it takes a slightly different approach where instead of having a protocol that's like a set of dependencies for each component, we just declare the different app level dependencies as their own protocols. And then we combine them together using Swift's protocol composition. So we'll start off.
And the protocol composition is that ampersand sign, right?
Exactly. And what's cool about that is it basically prevents you from having to manually explain, like, take these things from here and these things from here, and I'm going to describe this as like a new type of thing. You can just say these things from here and these things from there. I'll show a more concrete example. So let's say we have a networking protocol and we have a tracking protocol. And we have a, what do we have? A/B testing protocol. So the difference here is instead of putting these into feature-based protocols, we're going to combine them. And we'll start similarly by kind of showing how it could be difficult. Mm-hmm. So we'll say page one view controller. Oops. Okay, and let's say we need to have our, what did we have in the view controller? Tracking, right? Tracking.
Oh, put everything, because, you know, giant view controllers, why not?
Why not? Okay, well, I'm gonna demonstrate how this kind of gets chained out of control. Because, you know, in a single view controller with a lot of stuff that you need to pass in, that's not too bad.
Well, yeah, of course, as you know, with all of these examples, we're simplifying. It's way worse, way bigger in a real code base.
Always. What was it? Okay, yeah, A/B testing was the other one. So we're gonna do something similar. Let's do that.
Of course. Still don't know what this is for, to be honest.
Storyboards.
Storyboards?
Yeah.
I never use them. That's why I'm like, oh, what is that?
Oh, man. Well, maybe that's another episode. I'm a huge Storyboards fan. Although, you know, SwiftUI is kind of merges the concepts of code only and Storyboards. So it's probably the best of both worlds. Let's see. So here we want A/B tester. And this is a testing. A/B testing. A/B tester. Okay. And I won't go down another level, but usually you go from one view controller to another view controller, and probably at least one other. Like you push a few times. Or present modally a couple times in there. Oh, can we just do that?
Yeah, you could just do nils for those.
Well, I wonder. That's the touch bar there. I do that at least 5 times a day. I hit above the delete key, the little go to sleep. Yeah, I do got to use one of the designated initializers. All right.
I think we're still rolling, so we're good.
Okay. Is it going to complain?
Yeah, it needs another variable.
Oh. Got it. Let's do this. There it is. Bundle. Okay. Bring this down. Okay. I think we're in better shape.
I think it
Okay.
wants the
I'll
same
do
thing
the
you
fatal
had.
error.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. Okay. Okay, so here we have, as you had in your example, we'll say navigate to page 2. And then we're going to create page 2. And we have the same problem where we don't have A/B testing. So, okay, for now I'm going to do it. Anyway, you see the problem. I don't need to get into it more than that. So I'm going to leave that error there so we can think about that. So this comes down to a different pattern where you have, now we could just make one thing conform to networking, tracking, A/B testing. That's possible too. I sometimes just create a protocol that's called a provider.
So wait, before we go, so the possible solutions you have are inject an object that implements all of them, and then use that object everywhere, right?
Yep.
Or inject another object that returns those objects that implement those protocols.
Exactly.
And that's sort of what I had, effectively. That, well, almost.
Well, your feature dependencies returned a web service as a variable and a tracker as a variable.
Right.
The other option would be to make it be a web service and be a tracker and be an A/B tester. But that can, then you start having collisions with required method names and stuff. So it's a little bit more clean to keep these segregated. You still have a separate networking property. And so that's how I will do this. These protocols basically are for describing, these are an alternative to the feature one dependency organization of protocols, but it's a very similar concept. Tracker, tracking. So now we can do something very interesting. Okay. We can do something very interesting, which is that we can still have each of these view controllers describe exactly what they need, but now we can start composing those together and still pushing that responsibility for fulfilling them all the way up to the app level. So we're going to do this a little bit differently now. We're going to actually declare something as our dependencies. And actually, let's say that page 2 needs both. It needs both something that provides tracking and something that provides A/B testing. And we're also going to do our and I've typed it wrong. Oh no. Oh yeah. Dependencies. Okay, I spelled that one wrong a lot. Okay, and now we're just going to set our dependencies to the dependencies that get passed in. Okay. More typos. Sorry. There it is. I cannot type this word for some reason. Just every time. Okay, so now we've declared our dependencies here. We've type aliased it. So we're not creating a container or a new type. We're just saying anything that has both of these things is good for us. And we'll take that.
How do we can we quickly see how do we actually use it within page 2
Oh
view
yeah,
control?
sure.
Like in
So
view
let's
did
start
load
out
or
view
something.
did load, yeah. And let's see, we want to check.
We want to track for some reason.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. So we want to track, we would say dependencies. Oops. Tracker. And then it would be like track or whatever.
Got it. Okay.
But I didn't go into as much detail as you did and actually add.
That's okay. Yeah.
And we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to create. Now our dependencies, I know we shouldn't, but okay, no, I won't do that yet. Wow, that was not what I wanted. We're going to just do the same thing in den. This word is cursed.
I know, right?
Tracking, something that provides tracking.
Right, because this one only needs that.
Exactly. There we go. We'll do this. And I'm going to get this one right. Yes.
You just need a let though.
Cursed, I tell you. All right. And we'll set that here. Okay. So now if you look at this, we still don't have a solution to this because our dependencies are not the same.
Right. You can't really, pass it like that or something.
Right. So, because it'll say we're missing, it does not conform to A/B testing providing. So at least the compiler is very helpful. It says, hey, you're not passing everything you need. What's cool about this though, is that you can always compose these and say, well, since I know that I'm going to be routing to page 2 view controller. By the way, I should do a quick disclaimer. I don't ever think you should route view controller to view controller or pass any sort of data view controller to view controller. So
of course, yeah.
Disclaimer, but imagine this in some better architecture than that. I can always say, hey, you know what? I need to conform to page 2 view controller's dependencies. And now this goes away. So now I've basically said, hey, I need to be able to, whatever I get from my dependencies also has to include these dependencies.
I see.
And so now let's take a look at doing the same sort of concept where we create this, you know, an app container, app dependencies, we'll call them, something at the app level. And we'll do let tracker equal, I need
you don't
classes.
even have,
Final class tracker tracking. Tracker A/B tester and network. I'll just say web service. Okay, so tracker equals tracker. Oops, but to your point, or the thing we learned in your example, we still need to type it to the protocol.
Well, right now you're not conforming to anything, so you're good. Good
point. A/B testing. Tester. Oh, yeah, there we go. And then web. Oh, nope. This is supposed to be network. Yeah. Networking. Web service. Okay. And so now here's the interesting thing. When we conform this,
You probably want to create page one view controller, just to see that it doesn't compile, right?
Okay, sure. So we'll say page one. Now we're going to try to create it. And actually, let's create our single instance. Again, it's a single instance, but it's not a singleton. Let app dependencies equal app dependencies. And we're going to create our page one. Oh, playgrounds, right?
I think it could be before it though, right?
Sometimes it seems to work and
Not a
sometimes it doesn't.
scripting language per se.
I know it shouldn't be, right? So now I need to pass in its dependencies. And I'm going to try to pass in the app dependencies. But the compiler will warn us it does not conform to these protocols. So the good thing is that it actually could. So we'll just do an extension here. And we'll just say it conforms to A/B testing, providing, networking, providing, and tracking, providing. And we don't have to change anything because it already has the right named properties. And now, here we go. Now we can create this. What's cool is because page one says it needs page two, we don't have to worry about whether we're going to be able to conform to that as well. But let's take a look now at what happens when there's a new page three, earth-shaking new feature called page three in the app. Let's invent a new kind of thing. Page three uses feature toggles. Because it's not going to be totally on at launch. Okay, and I guess I'll do this one here. This will be toggles manager, I guess. That's what I see a lot. Okay. So page three view controller is going to need feature toggles. Now we're going to do the same thing and we're going to say we have some dependencies. And in this case, the only thing we need is feature toggles. And we're going to have our dependencies. We're going to init. We're going to, okay, and we're going to get our required, all the paperwork we got to fill out, right?
You can just copy it from line 70. Or
oh, okay. You're right. I just wanted a little reassurance that everything else I typed was actually valid. Okay. So here we go. Now we want feature toggles. So now we're going to want to have a function here where we route to page three. And now we're going to create a page three view controller. Now, again, yes, we're passing, oops, we actually don't need the label. We're passing, so instead of a singleton, we keep passing this object through, but every view controller sees this object a little bit differently. Nobody sees the whole object. If we look at it from page one, where we, oh, well, page one has all of these, but if we look at it from page 2's view controller point of view, it will be, we have A/B testing and tracker because that's what it calls for. But we know that the actual object up here also has, well, I guess it doesn't yet. A/B testing providing. Wait a minute. A/B tester.
I think you're missing feature toggles.
But
providing. But yeah, this shouldn't.
It shouldn't need it yet.
No.
What is A/B testing? Oh, this is why I messed up. There we go.
Gotcha.
So, you know, we can always add we'll add the web service in here. Oh, we do have it in there, network. So we can't actually see network from here because it's not a dependency of ours. And if we go into page 3 and we look at dependencies, we only see feature toggles, even though we're passing through the same kind of global dependencies everywhere.
So you're filtering out the availability of methods.
Yes.
On each level of using protocols.
Yes. And we're also not making each component dependent on things that it doesn't need to be dependent on, which again is why you don't really want to chain view controllers like this, because these view controllers are instantiating other view controllers explicitly, they have to be aware of their dependencies as well as their explicit type. This is a terrible architecture pattern, but this approach works well in a good architecture pattern as well.
So you're heavily utilizing one of the solid principles, right? Which one was it?
The interface segregation.
Yes.
So, and that basically says you shouldn't depend on something that you don't use. And so you don't want, you know, when we have that pattern, particularly in architectures where things get passed through, a lot of times we end up, if we were to pass through the entire app dependencies container itself, if we were to make the dependencies for this thing look like this, app dependencies, now all of a sudden,
I mean, it still works technically though.
It does work. But now we have access to things we don't need. And when we go to test this, we have to mock all of those things that we don't need. And when we want to break this out and use it in a different app, we've got to somehow recreate all of the dependencies for this app in another app, which may not even have A/B testing.
Or a feature, right? If you're modularizing.
Or a feature if you're modularizing. Exactly. So that's what the interface segregation principle is about. But let's see how this works. Now, in our previous no dependency injection scheme approach, if you look, we would be in a situation where we're saying we have a dependency on feature toggles. And that means that we have to manually add another parameter here and probably another, variable here to hold, like another private property to hold it. And then it goes up to page 1, which now needs to have feature toggles and everything. So this gets really tricky. But when we're using protocol composition, it becomes a lot easier because all we really have to do here is we have to say, well, page 2 view controller has to be able to create page 3. So we're going to say it's also needs to be dependent on the, it needs to get whatever dependencies page 3 needs. And now, notice we didn't have to change page 1. We didn't have to change anything up here, but the compiler is now pointing out that now our global container doesn't have feature toggles, which is true. So let's fix that. And here's another interesting thing. We don't even have to do this. We could just say, we could do this, but we could also start rolling together these. We can just say, hey, this needs to conform to what our different stacks.
And
again,
I see. So you're
right. Okay.
Since your top level effectively contains all of them, right? Your top level dependence type.
In this case, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So in a see, now we're not getting it yet. So maybe if I move this down below, this is the funny playground stuff.
Oh, well, yeah. That's why I used an iOS app instead.
Yes. So here we go. So, if you have a bunch of routers, then, you can also just say, hey, my app dependencies container conforms to all my different feature dependencies or module dependencies or routers. So, and the compiler will tell you what you're missing.
Mm-hmm.
So now what's cool is anywhere in the stack, let's say, in page 2 view controller, now I actually need networking. Not that we should, but let's say, I need to access the network from this view controller. Look at this. I just declare the dependency. I can access the network now. Let's say view did load, dependencies network. There it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have to update a line of code anywhere. We're not chaining dependencies up through different levels anymore, because we've basically defined our dependencies in terms of other dependencies. We're saying, page 1 has to get all the dependencies of page 2, and we're saying that the app dependencies container has to fulfill page 1's dependencies. So we've basically created a definition here which sort of proves that we have all the dependencies that are needed and declared anywhere in the stack.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, in this approach, you're also kind of kicking the can, if you will, but in a different way. The only difference is that with the components approach I had, you have several objects and you spread dependency resolution throughout your tree. In your case, you're just individually declaring what you need, and then it bubbles up through protocols up till down to the final object that actually implements it all.
Yes.
So there's that. Basically, we'll have this one dependencies object for a feature, let's say, or for application like you have right now. Mm-hmm. It kind of does it all.
Exactly.
Or returns them all.
Yes, exactly. It's the source of, it resolves them all. Uh-huh. And that works well for the app level dependencies. But you brought up this point of more like locally scoped dependencies, and we'll take a look at that. But the last point I wanted to make is just if we have some other protocol. Yeah, I know. Just typing challenge today. Okay. Let's say way down deep in our stack, I say, oh, I need some other protocol now. What I love is that the compiler will give us exactly one error, which is right up.
Right, eventually.
It is. Yeah. Here we go. Oh, wow. Wait a minute.
No. I think it's the... Oh, wait.
Yeah, no, this is really not... I think
that's the storyboard I was going to say. That's the playground thing, likely.
Yeah, this
That
is
shouldn't be.
playground. This shouldn't be allowed because
You can't even compile yet.
it shouldn't be able to compile. You know what? I'm going to actually, this is something I have to do a lot in playgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try it again. Somehow it like kind of caches. So we've created a dependency on some other protocol. We know that nothing conforms to that. So this is like literally bananas. Let's try this one more time. Kill Xcode. All right. Roll those dice. We're getting a full tour of all the playground oddities. I love when, like, you know, less than 100 line playgrounds go through these like
Can't compute. No.
Wow. Okay, so here we're going to force it to break. We're going to actually create something that this thing is going to do, and we're going to actually call it.
Mm-hmm.
Something. Okay, so now it certainly cannot resolve this. All right. Let's see where this is. There we go.
Right, okay.
So now we get the warning. Hey, but again, the warning isn't anywhere in your stack. It's nowhere in your chain. It goes straight up to the actual type. That is saying that it fulfills these dependencies, and it says, hey, you're not actually fulfilling all the dependencies you need to anymore. And so you've just fix it directly in that top level place. There's no fixing it all the way along the chain. So I'm gonna get rid of all that because that was just
right.
A quick little point. But there's this other aspect, and you know, I was talking with a coworker, and he described the distinction as like dependencies, which are kind of like your app-wide global things, versus just parameters, which are like the things you need to do your job, but they're not necessarily global.
Like data more, right?
Yeah, like a data configuration, a delegate, stuff like that. So I haven't really done it in this model before, but I thought, you know, it kind of comes back to that decorator pattern that we were talking about too. And so I wanted to try taking a look at how that would work. Are we fine on time? Do you want to still give that a shot? Okay. So I'm going to just call this, I'm going to change well, that's fine. We'll leave it dependencies. But I'm going to have another one. I'm going to have another thing called parameters. And I don't know, what sort of things do we have? Oh, yeah, we had a formatter, right? So we can call it an awesome formatter provided.
So would that be a parameter though?
Well, in the case of your example, it was, because it wasn't an app-wide thing.
Oh, I see. That's the distinction you're making. Because to me, I'm thinking parameters are pieces of data necessary for this thing to work. Meaning a model object. Let's say page 1 view controller was displaying details of a product. I need to pass a product object. That would be piece of data rather than dependency. And then param, right?
Yes. So let's take a look at something more like that. We'll call it like page to data. We'll make a struct, or we could call it a page to view model. Now for this approach to work, it does move there is still this boilerplate, like it reduces a lot of boilerplate, but it still has boilerplate in creating these very atomic protocols that describe like what different properties have to be bundled together. So we'll say that page 1 view controller. So now we're going to make this a parameter in page 2. And this needs to be page 2 view model providing. Okay, and we want our single our single argument, because we still want to be able to pass this one thing everywhere and not constantly be breaking it apart and peeling pieces around and passing it around. So we're going to say that we need whatever we're instantiated with to have both our dependencies and our parameters. And so now you can see it's already going to immediately squawk because it doesn't provide a view model. And the error is right at the point where the dependency is passed in. What we really want to do is, not everybody cares about this. Like page 1 view controller doesn't really need, it's not an app-wide dependency. Maybe page 1 view controller is the thing that configures the data for page 2 to show, like product data, like you said.
Right.
So maybe it knows what product someone selected and it's going to pass that along. So what we really want to be able to do is decorate the container that we have, our dependencies. We want to decorate it with just this additional piece of information, only here right in this spot. So
go ahead.
Oh, okay. So this brings us to, just check something here. Sorry. So this brings us to another trick where we want these containers to kind of bubble up. Every time we wrap a container that conforms to certain things, we want anything we wrap it in to conform to the same things that it does. So to do that, we're going to create a protocol called, I guess we can call it decorating. And we'll have the type that is decorated by us. And we're going to have a reference to our decorated type. And that's that. And then we're going to create some sort of container of something. And this container is going to conform to this protocol. And it's going to have a decorated thing, which is going to be whatever our generic type is. And we'll create an initializer. And this is like the old school OOP decorator pattern, basically.
Very old school, yeah. You just having a fancy protocol associations.
Yeah, yes. But what's cool is in Swift with generics and protocols, we can take a lot of the manual stuff out of that.
You want to make it a var.
Thank you. We can take all the manual where we have to create that decorator structure every time, and we can create one protocol that describes how to decorate things, and then we can kind of make it work for each of these.
Mm-hmm.
So now anytime we have a container that we're decorating something, we now have this like structure in place where we can start, every container of a container will have the same protocol conformances of the inner container. Boy, that sounds super inception-y. Apologies for that. But let's see what that looks like in practice. So what we want to say is anytime we have a decorator, anything that's decorating, where our decorated type conforms to network providing, we want to just forward that. We want to forward this implementation. So if the thing that we're wrapping around is already network providing, then we can also provide the network just by passing through the network of the type we're decorating.
This is getting very, very meta.
Meta, super
very,
meta.
Very meta.
So we'll do this kind of in the same fashion here, where we're just saying this, and this will just pass through the tracker. And so now where we wrap A/B testing, then we will pass this through. Now I will show where the payoff is. There's no, this isn't super exciting. It's like no one's going like, wow, I wish I could do all those protocol extensions.
Right.
And again, kind of to the point you were making earlier, like this really starts to pay off on a larger scale, or if you're doing, more modular reusable features.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've basically said, hey, anything that decorates something that provides a network is also providing the network. So we can now create wrappers around wrappers around wrappers, and the original protocol conformance all the way in the bottom of that wrapping thing will bubble up. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do it for this protocol too. Although I don't need to for this example, so I won't. Okay, so now
I think they specifically, just to quickly take a step back, data passing is something we probably would need another video for, because it's I haven't touched it in my solution, but there is a solution, and I think let's do another video for that.
Yeah.
For now, let's just finish with this decoration though. I see where you're going. I just want to see how
it works.
Yeah.
So inside our page view controller here, let me see here. This is going to be let me just make sure. Sorry, I'm thinking here how we're going to do this.
Well, you could have an inline object, right?
Yeah, I can. I can make like a private final class where it's kind of like it's a page
like
to
wrapper
model decorator. I mean, again, we could share this out more broadly if various things are going to create a page 2 view model. But this page 2 view model decorator is going to take something, is going to take some type that has to conform to page 2 view controller's dependencies. So it wants to wrap around the dependencies. Again, these are like the app share dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to and we'll even conform to that. And that's where our little protocol up and our extensions help, is that we're now going to say, hey, we also conform to the dependencies because the thing that we wrap conforms to the dependencies. But we also now want to also conform to page 2's view model providing. And again, we can page 2 view model. It's going to be there. And then we're going to, we want to init with, let's say, the view model.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever's going to create that, and the dependencies.
Right, because that's the thing we're wrapping around.
Exactly.
Okay.
And again, because we're referring to it by these type aliases, if these dependencies ever change, we don't need to actually change anything. Like we don't have to update boilerplate because this is all in terms of type aliases. So now to get this, we're going to inherit from container, and we're going to do this. So this makes us decorating because we inherit that from container. And we get all this, and we're going to say self view model equals view model. And we're going to say that we're going to call super init with our what we're decorating, which is our dependencies. So now we've created this runtime. Yeah, this is what I thought. Decorating with. So yeah, we kind of have to do it. This is where this is going to be a separate topic. I probably should have prepared this in advance, but we're trying to. This wants a concrete type, and we're passing in a protocol or like a composed protocol. So we really need to like here say like T. So we need to be instantiated with something that.
And that's of type T?
Yes, exactly. And then this is T. And then because that T. Oh, right. Because, oh, right. We forgot to say that we need this to be a container of, oh no, of RT. Oh, right. No.
Well, that's a new thing. If you do the initializer, the generic, then it's different T.
Yeah, you're right. We needed the same T. There we go. Okay. Now we're happy. So okay. Now once we initialize this, we can, so the idea here is then, so we've created this. So now the idea is when we want to pass this through, we can just wrap it and we can say next dependencies. And then we would wrap it in our decorator where we say our view model is, page 2 view, we'll just instantiate it. And then we would pass through the dependencies that we have. Although I think we're going to run into an error here because this is a protocol. So this is the whole existential types problem. And this is what I forgot this is going to be a little bit of a rabbit hole. So should have prepped this better.
I see what you're doing there. It's actually kind of seems to me similar to those components I had. The only difference is that you're trying to, well, yeah, you're decorating around it, which is also what I'm doing. How do I explain it? Your utilization of protocols, like you could also do, at some point eventually when it compiles, right? You could, in your decorator, that's in its implementation, that's where you could do those local dependencies.
Right? Yeah, exactly. You don't necessarily have to pass it in. You can right here instead of creating a new init, you can just say, you know, this
I believe
equals.
when Ribs framework was made originally they actually wanted the same approach. They had a base dependency protocol type, and then each dependency you pass in to decorate around using your component object would be subclassing from that. It didn't work because of the generic stuff. It was even earlier versions of Swift. I think now you could make it work. There's probably some gotcha we're not seeing right now.
Yeah. So the idea about, I guess, doing it at runtime is, again, like, well.
No, I mean, this is more safe if you manage to work well.
No, it is safe. Like, the compiler will definitely verify this. The compiler will say, hey, you have to pass something that provides these dependencies, and then I will add to it this new thing, this view model.
Okay, I think we should wrap up for now.
Yeah.
But we got to have another discussion about this and around passing values, data, and params, like this whole group, because again, the component Uber's component solution actually it has a solution for that as well.
Wow, cool.
And which is very simple. Actually, it's like use property params and a method. But that's the distinction.
Yeah.
Everything that's actually a dependency goes through the dependency protocols and component objects, all of that. What's not a dependency but params goes through that create view controller, that build method effectively. That's where you put it. But there were exceptions in my experience. Sometimes people would put params up in the component.
Yes. Yeah.
It was questionable. It was always a matter of a debate.
And I think that's the, that's right. And so the other problem is that sometimes you do get that passed, like certainly in the Wayfair app, there's sometimes layers of routers. There's like routers that wrap redirects and loading containers. And so sometimes even your parameters are created several layers earlier. And the reason for having like this decorator pattern is that it allows you at any point along the chain to take the app share dependencies and then wrap it with additional parameters. Like the error will bubble up, but whereas dependencies go all the way up to the app level, that app dependencies level, you want to be able to immediately resolve the parameter at any level just by wrapping the dependencies that you're already passing around with this additional parameter. And you should be able to decide where you create that parameter.
I understand now. So I think, okay, my gut feel here, I would have another object for params, and I would distinguish local dependencies versus params.
Yeah, make them a separate, like a separate parameter in the constructor. Yeah.
And then decorating around your app object that gets passed down with all the main dependencies to attach more local dependencies on it makes sense.
Yes.
But then params are like their own thing. I would also argue they're not going to be passed into initializer. If you're doing it, if you're doing it with like Viper, not at that point, because then you really need params only when you're constructing the final set of interactors, presenters, and view controllers.
Right.
That's when you pass it. So that's not an initializer. It's in that create view controller method.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It's a builder. It's effectively a builder method call.
Yes, you're right. But the reason why I started going down this route is because there's still, when you add one at that create view controller, you add a parameter, then the thing that calls that isn't necessarily the source of that parameter. Like I said, sometimes we pass things across stacks. And so the whole point of this is avoid having to do this like chain of updating everybody's constructors and everybody's function signatures back from where you added a parameter or a dependency.
Now I wonder, can we do exactly the same protocol chaining and decoration, but only, again, as a standalone object and types just for params.
Yeah.
And pass that into a method rather than initializer, and basically like have the same setup, but just for that group of variables.
Yeah. That's
Maybe let's explore that.
That's a good route to explore.
Yeah. All right, guys. That was a bit long, probably like the longest audio video recording we've done, but we thought
edit that down to 5 minutes.
I know, right? To double speed or quadruple. But yeah, we think it was kind of really wanted to share this because it was we learned a lot just talking to each other about it. And yeah, if you have any questions, shoot us an email at hello@insideriosdev or leave comments. It's probably going to be on YouTube. So ask your questions or leave comments in the comments section. And Daniel, where people can reach out to you?
Oh boy.
Like Twitter or email or anything.
There you go. I got a blog, danielhall.io.
Great. And yeah, guys, we'll be happy to, hear from you, and we'll put more of those videos out there. All right. Take care.
Thanks, Alex.